Good morning. Serge Belanger, one of the healthcare analysts at Needham. Welcome to day 3 of the Needham Healthcare Conference. We have the BioCryst team with us this morning. Company I've covered for a few years now. They went through a lot of exciting changes in the last year. First product approval, transitioning to a commercial biopharma, and recently announced some exciting data on the next asset they're bringing forward in development. So with us this morning, we have the CEO, Jon Stonehouse. We have the CFO, Anthony Doyle. We have the Chief Commercial Officer, Charlie Gayer. We have the new Chief R&D Officer, Ilan Thackeray. Chief Business Officer, Megan Szysinski. And John Bluth, who handles IR functions for the company. So welcome, everybody, and I'll hand it over to John to give us an overview, and then maybe we'll talk about the news that you guys announced this morning.
Sure. Thanks, Serge, and thanks for inviting us to the Needham Healthcare Conference. We can't forget Bill Sheridan, our Chief Medical Officer, as well as is with us today. So, the company's going through a major transformation. We are building a company that discovers, develops, and commercializes oral drugs for patients suffering from rare diseases. And we couldn't be more excited with where we are. There are very few companies that are able to do all three. And when you are, you create massive value. And we're in that transformation as we speak. And we look forward to sharing more details with you today. We're going to be making some forward-looking statements, and those statements have risks. And those risk factors can be found on our website. So, as Serge said, we've got some really exciting news. I'll give the headline, and then Megan can answer any specific questions that you have, Serge, on it. But this morning, it was announced that the MHLW in Japan, the Ministry of Health, had made a decision on the pricing, which is the final step in the process of approval. So we now have a Japanese price, and our partner, Torii, is ready to go, and we'll be launching the drug very soon. So extremely exciting time for us, both with the launch here in the U.S., now the launch in Japan, and soon we expect the approval in Europe as well and launching there.
Okay. So you had received approval, the Japanese approval, a few months back, right? So where does the Japanese list price kind of compare to the U.S. price?
Megan, you want to take that?
Sure, John, thanks. Hi, Serge. As we shared with the news today, the price equates to about $250,000 per patient per year. And for us, we're really pleased that we reached that agreement. I think the fact that now patients in Japan will have access to prophylaxis treatment, it will just revolutionize the standard of care and the treatment paradigm for these patients. So as John said, this is exciting news for us, and Torii is ready. As we shared in the press release, they'd be launching shortly after the price listing occurs on the 21st.
Okay.
So all in all, a really great day for the community.
And if I recall, this is the first prophylactic HAE product for the Japanese market?
Correct.
Okay. And remind us again the economics. I know there's a $15 million milestone now with the pricing has been established. Maybe just talk about the royalties or transfer pricing that's involved.
Sure, I'd be happy to. John, would you like me to take that one?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, Serge, you're right. The news today triggers the $15 million milestone from Torii. And then the other aspect of the partnership agreement, we were really excited that we structured it this way. We do participate in their success through a tiered royalty on net sales ranging from 20% to 40%. So again, as they build this market, and we're fully aligned on supporting this and making it as successful as possible, and we get to share in that great work that we expect them to do.
Great. Okay.
And Serge, I'd add one thing. You pointed out that this is the first prophylactic in the market. The market's extremely different from both U.S. and Europe. And so there's I think, a really nice opportunity to help patients with a once-a-day oral prophylactic treatment. And I think it's, what we've seen around the world is that when good therapies come forward in a country, the diagnosis and treatment of patients goes up dramatically. And so we expect that in Japan as well.
Okay. So let's talk about the U.S. launch. You launched a product in December. So in the next, I guess the next month or a few weeks, we'll see the first full quarter of sales. I don't expect you to give us that number today, but maybe just talk about give us a launch update. What you've seen so far and what have been some of the COVID challenges that you have to deal with in this environment.
Charlie, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure, Serge. So we're off to a very good start. We knew we invested early because we knew there was going to be a lot of demand from patients. We really invested in doing research to understand the marketplace, and so we got our sales force on early, and they were ready to go. So COVID has an impact, but the team's been really creative in terms of how they get in touch with doctors using Zoom calls, other mechanisms. It's been very successful. And the fact that we've got an innovative product that patients and doctors want means that the doctors and their staff have been receptive to seeing us. So despite COVID, we're off to a good start, and we're seeing that patient pent-up demand that we expected.
Okay. So are most reps able to have face-to-face meetings with physicians?
It varies across the country, and some have been able to do that more. It's really a state-by-state local kind of condition. Of course, most of the providers are vaccinated at this point, which is great. Our team's starting to get vaccinated, so more and more is going to open up, and that creates more opportunity for us to get to some of the providers that we haven't seen and to have those face-to-face interactions that ultimately are the best way to meet with customers. So we're looking forward to being able to do more.
And then in terms of the patient-physician interactions, I know from other products that, in this environment, there's a lack of face-to-face, those overall face-to-face interactions. And that's been kind of a limiting factor to switch patients to new products. Is that the same kind of issue for NHAE? Or are they a proponent of telemedicine use that kind of has addressed that a potential problem?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think, on the telemedicine side, what we see largely is that allergist immunologists, who are the main treaters, they really embrace that, and they used a lot of that, particularly earlier in COVID. But I think increasingly patients are being able to see their doctors. COVID, what we hear from doctors and patients, was not a big limitation to interacting, whether it was virtually or in person. And then the other thing is, just with Orladeyo being oral once daily, it's easy to prescribe, and so doctors have been comfortable prescribing it remotely to patients where the situation calls for that. And the last thing I'll say is, these doctors really tend to know their HAE patients well, because the average physician might only have 5, 10, 20 patients. And so the interaction, sort of the history is there. And for the right patients, that makes them very comfortable prescribing Orladeyo, even with COVID.
Okay.
I think something else, Serge, that Charlie's team's done a really good job of is all the investment and preparation work that we did leading up to the launch. So all the market research that we gathered for years in advance of the launch, and really understanding the switching that was going on in the marketplace, even before we got approved, right? There were other new drugs that came into the market. Then hiring the sales organization, 6 months before the launch, and getting them to get, used to doing Zoom calls with their new customers, and getting, prepared for whatever obstacles they'd face and how to navigate through that. And I think that's served us very well.
Yeah. And then, the U.S. market, the prophylactic therapies are pretty well established in the U.S. HAE market. So what has been the initial focus of the launch? Really on new patients, or switching from existing products? What do you focus on at this point?
Good question. Well, what I'll say is it's both of those, and you're right. The market it's great for patients. About 60% of the patients are already on prophylaxis, and what we heard consistently from both doctors and patients in that market research was that a lot of these patients really wanted to reduce their burden of treatment because the existing therapies are injectable and infused. And so, a big portion of our opportunity is switching. And then the other thing that doctors told us is with ORLADEYO out there, they see that 60% going to 80% of their patients over time. And in the early days, what we've reported is, that's exactly what's happening. We're getting, about half the business from switches, and then the other half patients newly coming to prophylaxis. Now they can do it with a once-a-day pill. So it's really good to see that.
Just one clarifying point. It's not newly diagnosed patients. Those are tiny
right.
fraction.
Mm-hmm.
These are patients that are either on-demand therapy, acute treatment, or prophylactic, and they're switching from either one.
Okay.
That's right. It's a very developed, in contrast to Japan, this is a very developed market. Prophy is used, the patients are known. The Japan strategy is going out, finding the patients, and then introducing prophy for the first time. So it's a great opportunity in all places.
And for product, for patients that have been on an injectable product for a while, is the willingness to switch just based on convenience, or just the willingness to try something new and that may be helpful?
Yeah, so I think convenience is a big part of it, but I think it goes way beyond convenience. It's what I was saying, that is that real burden. So there's preparation that goes into these injections. There's limitation on travel because some of these products have to be refrigerated. There's the scheduling of those infusions. It adds physical time burden, mental burden. There's, of course, the needle fatigue that many patients face. All of that is a big burden that is solved for many patients with an oral. And so it's those patients who are experiencing that burden, those are the ones who really want to switch.
And that's another key piece to our strategy. Megan and the MSL team has been out for a while, and we published last December a number of posters around the burden of therapy. And it's a paradigm shift. Instead of just treating attacks, which is what the old paradigm was, patient would talk to the doc and say, how well controlled are your attacks? How many attacks have you had? Now they have a broader conversation that's around the burden of their therapy in addition to the burden of their disease. And having those conversations is really opening the eyes of both patients and physicians that there's more to be gained here.
Okay. Maybe give us an update on reimbursement. For new products, at least in some other markets, sometimes it takes up to a year to get kind of the full reimbursement coverage by payers. Maybe how does it compare for ORLADEYO, and when do you expect to be at kind of a steady state level?
Yeah, it's a very, very important part of the process. So there's kind of three parts to our strategy there. The first is, when a patient and doctor have decided that ORLADEYO is right for that patient, we want to get them started right away, regardless of the reimbursement. So we've got a very comprehensive quick start program for patients so that everybody can get going right away. Well, then the second part is we help the providers and the patients through the access process. In the early days, for many patients, what that means is medical exceptions. We're having some success getting patients paid via medical exception. But what we're trying to do there is show the payers that there's a real demand from patients. And that kind of puts the pressure on them for the third part, which is getting to the formal policies for ORLADEYO. So quite a number of plans have already put ORLADEYO on policy. We expect good acceleration of that this quarter in Q2. And by about mid-year, we expect the great majority of payers to have coverage policies for ORLADEYO. There will be stragglers that go on throughout, but showing the payers the demand and really helping the providers push on that is paying off in early days.
Okay. And what kind of step-throughs or prior auths do you expect once these policies are implemented?
So we expect in the vast majority of cases, it's going to be the prior auths that they use for all prophy products. And so it'll be equal access for prophy, but patients will still have to go. There's lab tests, patient histories, usual stuff, but the providers are very familiar with that. And then our patient services program helps them through that process.
Okay. And as we talked before, we're going to see the first sales numbers soon. You haven't given guidance, and obviously that's usually not expected and for an initial launch. But are you comfortable with the current street expectations for first year sales?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Charlie. So, what we've said repeatedly is our goal is to meet or beat the expectations. And so you'll get the answer to that very soon.
Okay, good. I guess the overall HAE market, about a 2 million worldwide market, half of it is in the US. You said 60% or so was prophylactic. How do you think things change as a new product like Orladeyo comes on the market?
Yeah, so what we expect in the U.S., what the doctors have told us, and all signs point this direction, is getting more towards 80% of patients. HAE treaters really believe that prophy is the way to go, and now that they have more and better options, that accelerates that process. What we're really excited about in Europe, which will be kind of our next market that we're going to launch ourselves, is that historically prophy use has been very limited, but the doctors and the patients have kind of equal excitement about an oral once daily coming out, and so they're expecting that prophy use is going to expand significantly in Europe, and then as Megan was talking about, prophy use in Japan. So really, it's the way to go, and we see it growing worldwide.
Yeah, and I would add, so we have the market research that Charlie talked about, but now we have real world experience. We're seeing people switching from on-demand therapy during the launch in the US. So this is no longer hypothetical. That market is shrinking, right?
Yeah. And then, we touch upon Europe a little bit. Remind me again, has the product been approved in Europe, and what are your current launch plans?
So we've gotten the CHMP positive opinion, and we're awaiting the European Commission final sign off, and we're expecting that soon. And I'll let Charlie describe how ready we are. We made the same investments that I talked about in the US and Europe in advance, and I'll let him describe it.
Yeah, so that means the strategy, Serge, is hire really great experienced people in rare disease, get them ready, be fully prepared from a commercial perspective to launch. So our first launch will be Germany right after we get that EC approval. And then, what we're really excited about too is that we've got early access programs going in the UK with the EAMS program that we started in Q4 of last year. And then recently we announced the cohort ATU in France. So patients are starting to get access already in Europe today. And so we look forward to multiple country launches in the coming months and years.
Okay. Do you expect pricing to be, obviously it's not going to be at the same US level, but maybe something similar to what you were able to achieve in Japan?
Yeah, I think you got it. It's not going to be quite the same. In European markets, it's always more limited, but it's a great opportunity for us because the thing about Europe is the patients tend to be diagnosed, and so they're there. And so, like I was saying, that opportunity to grow the prophy market means it's and we're able to do it with really strong teams, but very efficient teams, because the treatment centers tend to be very concentrated. Sometimes hundreds of patients in one center. And so it's going to be a really profitable opportunity for us.
Okay. Before we move on to pipeline assets, I think in the past you've talked about peak sales potential for Orladeyo of 500 million plus. You still reiterating that that target?
Yeah, make sure you remember the plus.
Yeah.
Okay, will do. All right. So I wanted to talk about the next development asset that you've been talking about, 9930D oral factor D. Maybe just give us an overview of that asset and the mechanism of action.
Bill, you want to take that?
Sure.
And Bill, I didn't forget about you. You were just on the other page of my Zoom screen.
I won't hold it against you. So the BCX 9930 is a really terrifically exciting project. This is a potent and specific factor D inhibitor. So the mechanism of action is to block the enzymatic activity of that complement enzyme. That enzyme sits at the very start of the alternative pathway of complement. So that opens up a whole set of opportunities across different diseases that are driven by dysregulation of that alternative pathway of complement and the amplification loop that's embedded in that pathway. So our first experiment was in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. We've presented serially the accumulating results in that study, and at our R&D day on the 22nd of March, we had a patient advocate and a leading investigator who's collaborating with us on the study describe what patients need and what physicians want for their patients. And we went over the results that we've generated to date. And in summary, this is an anemia disease. Patients feel terrible and they have complications from hemolysis. And so what patients want is to not feel terrible and not have transfusions. And what doctors want is to see the hemoglobin go up and the transfusions go down. And that's exactly what we've generated in our data. We've treated patients now for longer than a year in that study, and we're skipping further dose ranging. We've completed dose ranging. We're going straight to pivotal studies starting later this year. So it's a very exciting program.
I'd add one other thing is, the market research that Charlie's team has done so far is really eye-opening in this space for a couple of reasons. One, while there are great improvements with the injectable therapy or infused therapy, these patients can spend a half a day in the infusion center getting their therapy. And that, good God, that's a burden, right, of treatment. And I think the other piece is all these patients remember when they weren't sick with PNH, right? So they remember life before PNH. And the idea of having a twice a day oral drug to treat their disease that manages all the things that Bill just described that we see in our study is a shot at having that life that they had before they got diagnosed with PNH.
Okay. So you have data now in treatment-naive PNH patients, as well as kind of inadequate responders to the C5 inhibitors. So where do you see the product fitting in terms of, the data you have so far?
Sure. So our goal, great question. Our goal is monotherapy. So there's really no fundamental reason why you would need to add a distal complement inhibitor if you're already using a proximal complement inhibitor like BCX 9930. And we've shown that very well in the C5 inhibitor naive subjects getting treated with monotherapy already. They're spectacular improvements. And in our C5 inhibitor inadequate responder subjects, the first thing to do is to add our drug to their existing treatment. Their existing treatment, by definition, is inadequate. And again, the responses in those subjects were very, very good. So over the course of the next period in the study, we expect that the investigators will be able to withdraw the C5 inhibitor, and we look forward to sometime later this year. Our plan is to share the data from monotherapy in that group. But the ultimate goal here, just to be really, really clear, is a broad label, single agent monotherapy with BCX 9930 for every patient with PNH, whether or not they had a C5 inhibitor and whether or not they're doing well on it now or doing badly.
I would underline everyone in Bill's statement, because it's the people that don't have access to a C5 inhibitor or for some reason choose not to go on it, the people that are on it but aren't well controlled, and the people that are well controlled that want something more and or don't want the burden of therapy, right? And so they want that idea of a less of a burden with an oral treatment. So we want everyone.
Okay. And as you go forward, the key endpoints here are really transfusion independence. Anything else that you're really keyed on? And then,
yes, absolutely. So, the regulators put a lot of trust in totally objective endpoints like increasing the hemoglobin in the absence of transfusions. So that's really important. So they're the two key things.
Got it. And then in terms of adverse events, I think the profile was, it was well tolerated. There were a few incidences of rash. It doesn't look like it was anything severe that led to discontinuations, but it always brings about some questions. So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the safety profile that's emerging with this drug so far has been really very satisfactory. We've had no discontinuations, no drug interruptions. So that says a lot. And, with chronic treatment now accumulating every week in 15 subjects who continue on the study, the rash is a non-event fundamentally. It's an inconvenience. It happens. It goes away by itself. Patients continue to take the drug twice a day, and it hasn't been a problem. So far, so good. Like with all complement inhibitors, we have to be very careful about protecting patients against infection with organisms like Neisseria. That was discovered with eculizumab, and so we make sure people are vaccinated. But the safety profile of this drug so far and the benefit profile that's emerging is strongly positive.
Okay. And then this was a few weeks ago, you announced plans for a pivotal trial in PHN. Have you had a chance to sit down with the FDA to kind of finalize the design of that trial, or is that upcoming at this point?
Sure. So last year we had very productive interactions with US and European regulators around our preliminary thoughts on pivotal study designs and dose selection. And we're now executing the completion of those regulatory interactions. We fully anticipate that that'll come to pass in due course, and we'll be able to start our pivotal programs in the second half of this year in PNH. I should add also that, going back to the very start here on opportunity across many diseases, we also are having regulatory interactions around selected nephritis indications, and we plan to start a proof of concept study in those indications again in the second half of the year.
And Bill won't do this, so I'll do it for him. I'll brag on him and his team. We were in a phase 1 study, and now, in the second half of this year, we're going to be in a pivotal studies in PNH and proof of concept in renal diseases. So that's warp speed, and that's really going fast.
Okay. As you think of the development path for the PHN indication, so what would a pivotal trial look like, just in terms of size and maybe some of the endpoints, and would you need to conduct 2 of them to satisfy FDA requirements for approval?
So that's a very interesting question. It's a rare disease space, a serious and potentially life-threatening disease. There's definite unmet medical need. I don't know whether 1 or more than 1 is required for approval. However, to give our commercial team the best opportunity to promote the drug across the board for every patient with PNH, we may choose to do more than 1 study to support a broad label. In terms of size and design, we'll go into that in more detail once we've completed the regulatory interactions and everything's nailed down. But you can look at what's happened with the other sponsors, and less than a few hundred patients is adequate or has been adequate to get drugs approved in this space, and it's a very rare disease. So I think that you can expect something of that order of magnitude. Durations have not been hugely long, right? So these studies can be done in terms of patient experience in a reasonable time frame.
Okay. And since these trials, like you said, aren't overly large, there's no need to really partner this product at this point. Company is able to move it forward on its own.
Do you want me to take that, John?
Yeah, sure.
So, this is an asset that we want it all permanently. So that means run the clinical program, launch the drug, and keep maximize the value. In the future, the way that value is maximized, can take different forms in different regions, obviously. But the goal here is to maximize the value for patients and therefore for the company.
Yeah.
We can certainly run the clinical programs without partnering.
Yeah, it's all about scale, Serge, and we've learned a lot from the HAE program, and so it's a matter of, can we do multiple indications in parallel, right? The PNH programs, it's different from HAE, but it's also very similar in certain ways in terms of size and scope, and so it's a matter of scale, and the financing that Anthony did at the tail end of last year gives us the opportunity to hang on to the rights, and so we've got the capital. And it's one of these things, we're just going to keep repeating what we're doing really well at, which is discovering these drugs, developing them, getting them approved, and then commercializing them. And that creates massive value.
Yeah. And like Bill said, this really looks like a kind of a pipeline and a molecule opportunity here. You talked about the renal complement mediated diseases. Maybe why'd you choose that indication as the first next one when there's a pretty open green field of other opportunities?
Sure. It's very exciting. So our approach is to rank indications by how well validated the alternative pathway is as a pathologic driver of the disease. And so the reason for doing that is to minimize efficacy failure risk in the program, right? So if we have abundant evidence that dysregulation of the alternative pathway is driving the disease, our goal is to dose to an adequate, safe dose to block factor D and block the alternative pathway. And expectations, if you want to be a Bayesian statistician, your Bayesian prior is really very strong here in terms of getting efficacy and minimizing the risk of efficacy failure. So that's our approach. I think over time, it's likely that we'll be able to take a bit more risk on that front. There are other diseases that might start off as driven by the classical or lectin pathway, but we know from various experiments that the alternative pathway accounts for about 80% of the activity of those other pathways. So, it might be useful to investigate those other diseases at the right time.
Okay, great. And then wanted to spend a little bit of time on the other asset, probably the one that gets less attention, mostly because we've gotten a lot more news on 9930 lately, but the 9250 molecule, and we've seen some data. Was it earlier this year or late last year?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just give us an overview and like what you're thinking about bringing that program forward.
Sure. So 9250 is an ALK2 kinase inhibitor. ALK2 is the enzyme that's mutated in a very particular way in every individual who suffers from this horrible disease. And there's a huge unmet medical need. There are no approved treatments. The progress of the disease is awful to see, and the typical patients are crippled by the time they're in adolescent years. So, it's very unfortunate that the programs that were ahead of us have met with huge obstacles. That's not a good outcome for the FOP community. So our data last year was our phase 1 single ascending dose and multiple ascending dose experiment in healthy subjects. And we're very, very pleased with the exposures we got. There were no safety issues at all. And we were able to achieve exposures with once daily dosing that look like that they are similar to exposures in rodent models where we force this new bone formation to occur, heterotopic ossification. So we could inhibit that at similar drug levels that we achieved in people. we now need to make a lot of drug and start chronic animal safety experiments in order to support progression in the clinical program. So that's the focus this year. But clearly this asset should be brought forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is there's a huge unmet medical need. And yeah, this program was on a slower track, but the data was really impressive that we got at the end of the year. And so now that we have the capital, we're going to speed the program up. And as Bill says, it's all about making drug, getting the tox so that we can be in a position to start clinical trials.
Okay. So maybe the next clinical trial gets underway in 2022? Probably. All right. And then just to end, maybe have Anthony talk a little bit about financials, the current cash balance, and I don't think you provided guidance for this year in terms of OpEx, but maybe just to talk about the cash runway and what's embedded in that.
Yeah, sure. So from a financial position, we're in a really strong position. So like John talked about, the financing that we did in December put us in a great spot. We ended the year with about $303 million in cash, access to another 75 upon meeting certain milestones for ORLADEYO. I think what it does is allows us to focus on executing on our strategy. I think it gives us a lot of freedom to invest in areas that are going to drive a lot of value creation. So specifically investing in the ORLADEYO launch globally, investing, like Bill had talked about, in 9930 across multiple indications, and then investing in 9250. And yet during the launch period, we've said that we won't provide guidance. But what we have said is, from a cash runway perspective, the cash on hand that we have, in addition to the available options through the financing that we did in December, gets us into 2023. So, revenue, being able to generate revenue in the US, being able to generate revenue now in Japan, and hopefully soon in Europe, that in addition to our cash balance puts us in a really great spot.
Okay. Well, I think we're up on our time here, so I want to thank all of you. It was great seeing you on my computer screen here. Hopefully we can meet in person soon. Thanks for the great overview this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Serge.
All right.
Serge.